So far, you have only used subqueries in the where clause of a select statement, but we can also use subqueries in the select clause. Let me show you. Let's say we want to generate a report like this. So here we have 4 columns: invoice ID, invoice total, invoice average, which is the average of all the invoices in our invoices table, and the difference between the invoice total and invoice average. Let me show you how to write a query to produce this result. So we're going to start by selecting the invoice ID and invoice total columns from the invoices table. Next, we need to calculate the average of all invoices in this table. So this is where we write a subquery. We start with our parentheses, and inside these parentheses, we write a subquery. So select average of invoice total from the invoices table. And then we give it an alias like invoice average. Let's execute the query. So this is what we get. We have the invoice ID, invoice total, and invoice average. Beautiful. Finally, we need to add the last column to calculate the difference between the total and the average. So here we can write an expression like this: invoice total minus. Now here we cannot add invoice average. In other words, we cannot use a column alias in an expression. One solution is to copy this entire subquery and put it here. But that looks a little bit too long, and I don't like this repetition of our query. So here's a better way. We can convert this invoice average to a subquery. So we put it in parentheses and then simply select it here. Now let's execute the query one more time. There you go. So we can see the difference, but look at the name of the column. It's set to the exact expression we have used here. So let's rename that to difference. That is better. So subqueries are not limited to where clauses. You can also use them in the select clause as well as the from clause, which I will show you in the next lecture. All right, here's your exercise for this tutorial. Write a query to produce this result. Here we have these columns: client ID, name, total sales for each client, which is basically the sum of all the invoices issued for each client. We also have the average sales. So this is the average of all invoice totals. And finally, the difference between these two columns. Note that for client number 4, we don't have any invoices. That's why we have null in these two columns. All right, I'm going to start by selecting the client ID and name columns from the client's table. Next, we need to get the total sales for each client. So here we write a subquery, select sum of invoice total from the invoices table, where the client of this invoice equals the current client. So here we have to write a correlated subquery. So we need to assign this table an alias like C, and then write our search condition like this, where client ID equals C.client ID. So this subquery returns the total sales for each client. Let's give it an alias, total sales. Next, we need to calculate the average sales across all invoices. That is pretty easy. So we select average of invoice total from the invoices table and give it an alias like average. And finally, we need to calculate the difference between these two columns. Earlier, I told you that you cannot use these column aliases in your expressions. So here we can write a subquery like this: select total sales minus average. Now let's give it an alias like difference. That's it. Let's execute the query. So here's the end result. Beautiful.